Have you ever had one of those neighbors who thinks the strip of grass in front of your house is their personal kingdom? The kind who measures your lawn with a ruler and leaves passive-aggressive notes about the non-regulation height of your daisies? Well, I had one of those, but he wasn't just a neighbor. He was Mr. Abernathy, the self-appointed generalissimo of the Harmony Creek Homeowners Association Security Patrol, and his kingdom was the entire neighborhood. My name is Alex, and for the past 5 years, I've lived with my grandfather in the house he built 50 years ago, long before any HOA existed. I'm a technical writer by trade, which means my brain is wired for rules, regulations, and finding loopholes. All I wanted was to live a quiet life, tend to our garden, and help my grandpa, a retired electrical engineer, with his various tinkering projects. But Mr. Abernathy, with his crisp khaki uniform and perpetually suspicious scowl, seemed to have made our peaceful existence his personal mission to disrupt. The inciting incident, the final straw that turned my quiet frustration into a cold, calculated fury, happened on a Tuesday. I was in my home office, trying to decipher a particularly dense user manual for a new piece of industrial machinery, when I saw him. Abernathy. He was standing at our back fence, a 6-foot privacy fence that Grandpa and I had installed ourselves. He peered over it, his little clipboard in hand, his eyes scanning our vegetable garden. Then, instead of walking around to the front gate like a normal human being, he hoisted himself up, swung a leg over, and dropped into our backyard. He proceeded to march over to our prize-winning tomato plants and stick a little yellow violation flag in the soil. The infraction? Non-uniform staking method. I was stunned. This wasn't the first time he'd entered our property without permission, but it was the most brazen. What he didn't know, what no one in that HOA knew, was that he wasn't just trespassing on the property of a technical writer and a retired engineer. He was trespassing on the patience of 2 people who understood systems, mechanical, electrical, and bureaucratic, better than he could ever imagine. He had just started a war of attrition with experts in the field, and we were about to teach him a very hands-on lesson about boundaries. Have you ever been pushed so far that the only logical response is to build a ridiculously clever, legally sound, and utterly humiliating trap? Because that's exactly what we did, and trust me, you're going to want to hear how it all played out. This isn't just a story about an electrified gate. It's a story about reclaiming your peace, using your unique skills to fight back against petty tyranny, and the sheer unadulterated satisfaction of watching a bully get exactly what he deserves, all while you're sitting on your porch with a tall glass of iced tea. The first step in any conflict, at least for a reasonable person, is to try and resolve it through communication. I am, by nature, a reasonable person. My grandfather, a man who spent 40 years designing complex circuits that had to work perfectly every single time, is the epitome of logic and reason. So we started there. The day after the tomato staking incident, I waited for Abernathy to make his afternoon rounds. I met him at the edge of our property, holding the little yellow flag he'd planted in our garden. I kept my tone even and polite. "Mr. Abernathy," I began, "I'd appreciate it if you didn't climb our back fence to enter our yard. We have a gate at the front, and if you need to inspect something, you can call us to arrange time. Trespassing is a serious issue." He barely glanced at me, his eyes fixed on a birdhouse hanging from our oak tree, probably checking if it complied with the HOA's approved color palette. Article 7, Section B of the Harmony Creek Covenants, he recited in a monotone voice, as if reading from a sacred text. The Architectural Control Committee and its designated agents have the right of entry onto any lot for the purpose of inspection and maintenance to ensure compliance. He finally looked at me, a smug little smirk on his face. "I'm a designated agent. I don't need your permission." I held my ground. Right of entry doesn't supersede state law regarding trespassing, especially into a fenced, private backyard. It typically refers to common areas or the front of the property. Climbing a locked fence is a clear violation of our privacy and safety. He actually chuckled, a dry, grating sound. "You can interpret it however you like, son. I have a job to do." Now, about this birdhouse, the shade of blue appears to be cerulean sky. When the approved shade is morning dove blue, I'll be issuing a notice he scribbled on his clipboard, completely dismissing my primary concern. My next stop was the HOA board meeting. It was held in a stuffy, beige community center room that smelled of stale coffee and quiet desperation. I presented my case calmly and logically to the three-person board, headed by a woman named Brenda, who seemed to wield her power with the grim authority of a wartime general. I explained Abernathy's repeated trespassing, culminating in him climbing our fence. I cited the relevant state laws. I requested that they simply instruct their designated agent to respect basic property laws and common decency. Brenda listened with a practiced, impassive expression. When I was finished, she adjusted her glasses and said, "Mr. Abernathy is a volunteer, Alex. He's very dedicated to maintaining our community standards. Perhaps if your property were in better compliance, he wouldn't feel the need for such thorough inspections." The other two board members just nodded along like bobbleheads. My reasonable approach had failed. It had been rebuffed with condescension and blame. The system wasn't just broken. It was designed to protect the very people who abused it. And Abernathy, now feeling completely vindicated and untouchable, escalated his campaign. The violation notices became a weekly occurrence. Grass blade height in non-compliance by a quarter-inch. Visible garden hose not coiled in a perfect, concentric circle. Unapproved species of squirrel observed consuming birdseed from a non-standard feeder. It was absurd. Then, one morning, we found one of Grandpa's prize-winning rose bushes had been trampled, with a clear boot print next to it that matched Abernathy's ridiculous tactical boots. A new violation notice was tucked under our doormat. Improper pruning of Rosa Peace. That was it. This was no longer about rules. This was a personal attack. That evening, Grandpa sat at the kitchen table, slowly cleaning his spectacles with a microfiber cloth. He looked at the pile of violation notices, then at me. His usual calm demeanor was gone, replaced by a glint in his eye I hadn't seen in years. The look of an engineer who's just been presented with a fascinating, infuriating problem. "All right, Alex," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "Reason has failed. It's time to switch from social science to physical science. He wants to cross a boundary. Let's give him a boundary he can feel. Go pull up the city ordinances on agricultural fencing. And give me the schematics for a standard cattle fence charger. We have a project to work on." The game had changed. We were done talking. We're going to build. The shift from frustration to focused action was palpable in our house. The cloud of helpless anger was replaced by the quiet, methodical hum of a project taking shape. This was my grandfather's element. For him, a problem wasn't a source of stress. It was a set of parameters waiting for an elegant solution. Our investigation began not with anger, but with research. As a technical writer, digging through dense, jargon-filled documents was my specialty. Grandpa, as an engineer, knew that the foundation of any successful project is understanding the rules of the system you're working within. We divided the labor. I was tasked with the legal and bureaucratic deep dive. I spent the next 2 days poring over every document I could find. The original Harmony Creek HOA covenants, all subsequent amendments, city zoning laws, county ordinances, and state statutes regarding property rights, trespassing, and fencing. I highlighted, cross-referenced, and built a legal fortress of information. The HOA covenants were, as expected, vaguely worded to give the board maximum power. The key phrase was right of entry, but as I suspected, state law was much clearer. It defined criminal trespassing in unambiguous terms, especially concerning enclosed spaces like a fenced backyard. The right of entry could be argued to apply to unenclosed front yards for meter reading, but a 6-foot locked privacy fence created a legal barrier that the HOA's internal rules couldn't just wave away. Then I found a crown jewel. It was a small, almost forgotten city ordinance, enacted decades ago to accommodate the area's rural past. It was titled Ordinance 74B, Fencing for Containment of Small Livestock and Garden Protection. It explicitly permitted the use of low-voltage, pulsed electric fencing on properties zoned as residential, provided the fence was clearly marked and the voltage did not exceed a specific, safe threshold designed to deter, not harm. It was a relic, a loophole big enough to drive a tractor through, left over from a time when people kept chickens in their backyards. Our sprawling vegetable garden, which Abernathy so despised, was about to become our greatest legal asset. Meanwhile, Grandpa was in his workshop, a place that was part laboratory, part museum of 20th century electronics. He wasn't just looking up schematics. He was reinventing the wheel with his own signature flair for precision and safety. He emerged on the third day with a set of hand-drawn blueprints that were more like a work of art. "Here's the plan," he said, spreading the papers on the kitchen table. "We're not going to electrify the whole fence. That's messy and could be a hazard for squirrels or neighborhood cats. We're going to be surgical." His plan was brilliant. We would focus solely on the top of the metal gate in our back fence, Abernathy's preferred point of entry. He designed a system using a standard, commercially available 12-volt fence charger, the kind you could buy at any farm supply store. It converts the 12-volt DC from a battery into a high-voltage, low-amperage pulsed output. The key, he explained, was the low amperage and the pulse nature. It wouldn't be a continuous current. It would deliver a single, sharp, surprising jolt, about the same as a powerful static shock from walking on a dry carpet. It was designed to startle a 1,200-pound cow, so it would certainly get the attention of a 180-pound HOA patrolman without causing any injury. The aha moment came when he showed me his masterstroke. "We'll wire it so the circuit is only completed when someone is touching both the top of the metal gate and the metal latch handle simultaneously," he explained, pointing to his diagram. Abernathy braces himself with one hand on top of the gate while he reaches down with the other to unlatch it from the inside. His body will complete the circuit. It's targeted, it's specific, and it's completely harmless to anyone using the gate normally from either side. We had found our solution. It was legally sound, thanks to Ordinance 74B. It was technically elegant, thanks to Grandpa's design. And it was aimed directly at our antagonist's specific method of transgression. We weren't just building a deterrent. We were crafting a bespoke instrument of justice, calibrated perfectly to the arrogance of one Mr. Abernathy. The satisfaction of that moment, of seeing the path forward so clearly, was immense. The investigation was over. It was time to start building the trap, with a solid plan rooted in both legal precedent and sound engineering. The next phase was formulation and preparation. This wasn't going to be a slapdash affair. Every step had to be deliberate, documented, and executed with the precision of a military operation. My grandfather and I became a two-person strategic team. Our kitchen table, once a place for quiet meals, was now our command center, covered in blueprints, printouts of city ordinances, and lists of materials. Our first order of business was to establish our legal high ground beyond any doubt. I drafted a formal letter to the HOA board. It was a masterpiece of polite, professional, and subtly threatening correspondence. In it, I didn't mention our plan. Instead, I formally notified them, for the record, that any further unauthorized entry into our fenced backyard by their agent, Mr. Abernathy, would be considered criminal trespassing, and we would pursue all available legal remedies, including filing a police report and initiating a civil suit against both Mr. Abernathy and the HOA for harassment. I attached copies of the state trespassing statutes, highlighting the relevant sections. I sent it via certified mail with a return receipt requested. This created a paper trail. They could no longer claim ignorance. They were now officially warned. Next, we went shopping. But we didn't go to an electronics store. We drove an hour out of town to a proper agricultural supply cooperative. We wanted the receipt to prove where we bought the components. We purchased a top-of-the-line, UL-listed fence charger, the kind used on farms across the country. We bought high-visibility warning signs, the bright yellow and black kind with a universal lightning bolt symbol and clear text. Caution, electric fence. We bought insulated wiring, grounding rods, and all the necessary connectors. We paid in cash, but got a detailed, itemized receipt. Every piece of evidence was another brick in our wall of justification. Back in the workshop, Grandpa began assembling the core components. He worked with the focus and joy of a true craftsman. He modified the charger slightly, adding an extra layer of safety with a ground fault circuit interrupter, GFCI, and a timer. The timer is key, he he explained, soldering a connection with a steady hand. We'll set it to be active only during Abernathy's typical patrol hours, from 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. on weekdays. That way, if a teenager tries to hop the fence on a Saturday night, or if we forget about it ourselves in the morning, it will be completely inert. It minimizes any unintended risk. Meanwhile, I worked on the agricultural justification. We expanded our garden slightly, adding a few more rows of corn and beans. I bought a small decorative chicken coop online. No chickens, just the coop, and placed it in a visible corner of the yard. We were creating a scene, a plausible narrative. We weren't suburbanites with a grudge. We were modern homesteaders protecting our valuable crops from pests, both four-legged and two-legged. It was a bit theatrical, but it was legally sound under the ordinance. The plan for the reveal was just as important as the trap itself. We needed witnesses, but not in a way that seemed staged. We would install 2 new high-definition security cameras. One would be positioned to get a perfect, clear shot of the gate, capturing anyone climbing over it. The second would have a wider angle, showing the porch where Grandpa and I would be sitting, calmly drinking our iced tea, establishing our non-confrontational presence. The footage would be our undeniable proof, capturing the event from multiple angles. We would be the picture of innocence, simply enjoying our afternoon on our private property. Throughout this period, Abernathy's arrogance only grew. He must have received a copy of my letter from the board, because his campaign of petty harassment intensified. He'd walk by the front of the house, deliberately slow, clipboard in hand, making a great show of scrutinizing every shingle on our roof. He saw us working in the backyard near the gate, digging a small trench for the grounding rod. He actually stopped and called over the fence. Any modification to existing fencing requires approval from the Architectural Control Committee. I hope you filed the proper paperwork. Grandpa just smiled, waved, and said, "Just doing a little gardening, Mr. Abernathy, making sure the soil is properly aerated." Abernathy scoffed and walked off, smug and oblivious. He saw activity, but his mind was so rigid, so locked into his narrow view of HOA violations, that he couldn't conceive of what we were actually doing. His overconfidence was the final, crucial ingredient in our plan. He was walking toward the trap with his eyes wide open, convinced he was the one in control. The stage was being set, and the lead actor had no idea what his role was about to be. The week leading up to the main event was a period of intense, quiet activity. It felt like the final preparations before a product launch, a mix of meticulous engineering and nervous anticipation. While Grandpa focused on the hardware, my role shifted to documentation and atmosphere. Every action we took was deliberate, designed to build our case and ensure the narrative, when it finally unfolded, was entirely in our favor. We began by installing the warning signs. We didn't just slap one on the gate. We placed 3 of them in accordance with the Agricultural Ordinance's recommendations. One was mounted directly on the gate at eye level, impossible to miss. A second was placed on the fence post adjacent to the latch. The third, for good measure, was attached to the fence about 10 feet away, ensuring that the warning was clearly visible from multiple angles of approach. The signs were large, professional, and screamed official. They were a statement of intent, a final, unspoken warning that Abernathy, in his hubris, would surely ignore. Next came the installation of the system itself. Grandpa worked with the precision of a surgeon. He ran the insulated wires through a discreet PVC conduit buried a few inches underground, leading from his workshop to the gate. The connections to the gate and latch were clean and almost invisible unless you were specifically looking for them. He grounded the system using an 8-foot copper rod driven deep into the earth, ensuring a stable and safe electrical path. The battery and the fence charger unit were secured inside a locked, weatherproof box mounted on the exterior wall of the workshop. To any casual observer, it looked like a new junction box for garden lighting. He even labeled the box with a custom-printed sticker, 12V DC Garden Irrigation Control. It was a beautiful piece of misdirection. Inside, he fine-tuned the timer and tested the output with a voltmeter. The pulse was perfect, a sharp spike of high voltage, but with amperage so low it was medically insignificant, lasting for only a fraction of a second. It was all about the surprise, not the power. While he finalized the electronics, I set up the cameras. I mounted them under the eaves of the house, weatherproof and secure. I spent hours getting the angles just right. Camera 1 was zoomed in on the gate, a tight shot that would capture every detail of the climb and the reaction. Camera 2 was the wide shot, our alibi camera, showing the entire backyard, the porch, and our calm demeanor. I connected them to a cloud-based recording system that time-stamped every frame and was inaccessible to anyone but me. The evidence would be immediate, undeniable, and securely stored off-site. During this time, Abernathy's behavior became even more predictable, a gift to our planning. His afternoon patrol was like clockwork. At precisely 2:45 p.m., his golf cart would round the corner. He'd park, get out, and do a slow, deliberate walk along our property line, clipboard in hand. He saw the new warning signs. We watched from the living room window as he stopped, stared at the sign on the gate, and actually smirked. He tapped it with his pen, shook his head, and scribbled something on his clipboard. We could almost hear his thoughts. A ridiculous, empty threat. Another violation for unapproved signage. He was so blinded by his own authority that he interpreted our clear warning as just another rule for him to enforce. He didn't see it as a rule that might apply to him. This was the critical flaw in his character we were exploiting. His profound belief that he was above the rules he so zealously enforced on others. The day before we planned to go live, a neighbor, Mrs. Gable from 2 doors down, stopped by while I was watering the front lawn. She was a sweet older lady who had also been on the receiving end of Abernathy's pettiness. "Alex, dear," she said, gesturing toward our house, "I couldn't help but notice those new signs on your back fence. Is everything all right?" I gave her a reassuring smile. "Everything is fine, Mrs. Gable. We've just had some trouble with pests getting into the garden and trampling the plants. We're trying a new, humane deterrence system." She nodded, her expression turning conspiratorial. "You mean the 2-legged pest in the khaki uniform?" she whispered. I just winked. "The signs are for all unwelcome intruders." It was a small moment, but it was important. We were building a quiet coalition of support. We weren't hiding what we were doing. We were framing it in a perfectly reasonable light. The stage was now completely set. The hardware was installed, the legal groundwork was laid, the evidence collection system was online, and the antagonist was more arrogant and predictable than ever. All we had to do was activate the system and wait. The morning of what we privately called Operation Jolt dawned bright and clear. There was a nervous energy in the air, the kind you feel before a final exam for which you've studied tirelessly. Every variable had been accounted for, every contingency planned. Now, it was simply a matter of execution. Grandpa and I started our day with our usual routine. Coffee on the porch, a walk around the garden, and a quiet discussion of the day's news. But underneath the calm exterior, we were both running through our mental checklists. At noon, we had a simple lunch. Then, at exactly 12:45 p.m., we walked to the workshop. Grandpa unlocked the gray utility box. Inside, the components were arranged with military precision. With a small, deliberate flick of a switch, he activated the timer circuit. A tiny green LED began to glow. The system was now armed, set to go live from 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. "No turning back now," he said, his voice even. I nodded. "There's nothing to turn back from. We're just protecting our property." We returned to the back porch and settled into our rocking chairs. I had a tall glass of iced tea and a book I had no intention of reading. Grandpa had his crossword puzzle. On the small table between us, my tablet was propped up, displaying a live feed from both cameras. The view was crystal clear. The gate stood there, silent and waiting. The yellow warning signs gleamed in the afternoon sun. The waiting was the hardest part. Every minute stretched into an eternity. A squirrel ran along the top of the fence, and we both held our breath until it safely scurried past the gate. A mail truck rumbled down the street. The wind rustled the leaves in the oak tree. It was a perfectly normal, sleepy afternoon, but for us, it was charged with suspense. We made small talk discussing the weather and the progress of the zucchini plants, but our eyes kept darting to the tablet screen. At 2:42 p.m., right on schedule, the familiar hum of an electric golf cart grew louder. My heart started beating a little faster. On the screen, the golf cart pulled into view at the end of the street and parked in its usual spot. Mr. Abernathy emerged, clipboard in hand. He adjusted his belt, settled his hat, and began his slow, methodical march of scrutiny. He checked the mailbox of the house across the street. He bent down to measure the height of a neighbor's sprinkler head. He was drawing out, building his own little drama of power. Then, he turned his attention to our property. He walked along the side fence, his eyes scanning for any new infraction. He paused, looking up at the cameras. He couldn't see us behind the porch screen, but he knew we were there. He gave a little sneer, a look of pure, unadulterated contempt for people who dared to challenge his authority. He continued to the back fence. He stopped directly in front of the gate, just as we knew he would. The close-up from camera 1 was perfect. We could see the expression on his face as he looked at the warning sign again. It was a mixture of annoyance and amusement. He clearly saw it as a childish act of defiance. He shook his head, muttered something to himself, and then, without a moment's hesitation, he began his climb. It was happening. After weeks of planning, it was all unfolding exactly as we had predicted. He placed his booted foot on the lower crossbar of the fence. He reached up and grabbed the top of the metal gate with his left hand to steady himself. Then, he swung his right leg over the top. For a second, he was perched there, a ridiculous figure of khaki-clad authority breaking the law in broad daylight. The final step was to reach down with his free right hand to unlatch the gate from the inside. The trap was set. The circuit was waiting. All it needed was for him to complete it. My grip on my iced tea glass tightened. Grandpa had put down his crossword puzzle. We both leaned forward, our eyes glued to the screen, waiting for the moment of contact. The moment of truth arrived with an almost theatrical slowness. On the tablet screen, we watched Abernathy perched precariously atop our gate. His left hand was firmly planted on the cool metal top rail. His right hand, a picture of deliberate action, reached down towards the latch handle. The two pieces of metal, the positive and the negative terminals of our carefully laid trap, were separated by just a few inches of air. Grandpa and I were silent, barely breathing. The world seemed to shrink down to that single, high-definition image on the screen. His fingers made contact. For a split second, nothing happened. And then, the 12-volt charger did its job. It sent a single pulsed, high-voltage, low-amperage jolt through the circuit that was now his body. Abernathy's entire body went rigid. His eyes bulged wide in a comical mask of pure shock and surprise. He let out a strangled yelp, a sound somewhere between a frightened bird and a squeaky toy that was just audible from the porch. His hands flew off the gate as if it were red hot, and his carefully orchestrated trespass turned into a flailing, uncoordinated tumble. He didn't fall gracefully. He collapsed backwards, off the fence, and into a heap on the public easement outside our yard, landing with a soft oof in the manicured grass. The wide-angle shot from camera 2 was priceless. One moment, he was a figure of authority invading our space. The next, he was a tangled mess of limbs on the ground, his precious clipboard having flown from his grasp and landed several feet away. For a moment, he just lay there, blinking at the sky, his face a kaleidoscope of confusion, indignation, and pain, though the pain was clearly more to his pride than to his person. This was our cue. As planned, we didn't rush out yelling or laughing. We calmly folded our newspapers and set down our glasses. We walked off the porch and across the lawn to the gate, projecting an air of neighborly concern. I opened the gate from our side, using the insulated handle, of course, and we stepped out. "Mr. Abernathy, are you all right?" I asked, my voice infused with just the right amount of polite surprise. "You took quite a tumble there." He scrambled to his feet, brushing himself off furiously. His face was beet red. He was sputtering, trying to regain his composure and his authority at the same time. Your fence," he stammered, pointing a trembling finger at the gate. It shocked me. "You've booby-trapped your fence. That's illegal. I'm going to have you fined. I'm calling the police." Grandpa, ever the calm center of the storm, simply pointed to the large, bright yellow sign on the gate. The sign says caution, electric fence, sir, he said in a calm, didactic tone. It's a standard, low-voltage agricultural deterrent to protect our garden. Perfectly legal under City Ordinance 74B. We have all the paperwork. I held up a clear plastic folder I had brought with me. Inside was a copy of the ordinance, the receipt for the farm-grade fence charger, and its UL safety certification. We're just protecting our vegetables, Mr. Abernathy, I added, from pests. We filed a formal notice with the HOA last week stating that any unauthorized entry would be considered trespassing. You climbing our fence, after being warned, is a criminal act. And luckily for us, we happened to capture the whole thing on our new high-definition security cameras. I gestured up at the two small, dark domes under the eaves of our roof. The color drained from Abernathy's face. The realization of how completely and thoroughly he had been outmaneuvered began to dawn on him. His blustering rage deflated into a shocked, impotent silence. He looked from the sign to my folder of evidence, to the cameras, and then back to us. He had walked into a trap that wasn't just electrical, but legal and logistical. The hunter had become the prey, and the evidence of his own wrongdoing was irrefutable. The tables hadn't just been turned. They had been completely flipped over, and he was pinned underneath. Abernathy stood there, utterly defeated. The khaki uniform that was once a symbol of his petty power now looked like a cheap costume on a man who had just been publicly humiliated. His mouth opened and closed a few times, but no sound came out. The blustering, condescending tyrant was gone, replaced by a sputtering, red-faced man who had been caught red-handed. He had no legal ground to stand on, and he knew it. My grandfather and I simply stood there, waiting. We didn't gloat. We didn't raise our voices. Our silence was more powerful than any accusation. Now, I said, breaking the quiet, I see two ways this can go. Option A, you pick up your clipboard, get back in your little cart, and we never have a problem with you trespassing on our property again. We'll agree to consider the matter closed. Option B, you continue to make a scene, and I call the police right now to file a report for criminal trespassing. I will hand them the time-stamped, high-definition video of you ignoring our warning signs and climbing our fence. I will also provide them and the HOA board with the certified letter we sent last week, proving this was a premeditated act on your part. I let that hang in the air for a moment. And then I continued, we will have a very serious discussion with our lawyer about a civil suit for harassment. What's it going to be, Mr. Abernathy? He stared at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of fury and fear. The threat of public, legal consequence was something his little bubble of HOA authority had never prepared him for. He snatched his clipboard off the grass, refusing to make eye contact. Without another word, he turned, stomped back to his golf cart, and drove away with a squeal of tires that was far too dramatic for such a low-powered vehicle. The immediate confrontation was over, but our plan was far from complete. Phase 2 began that evening. I edited the camera footage into a concise, damning 3-minute video. I started with a clip of Abernathy trampling Grandpa's roses from a few weeks prior, captured on an older, grainier camera. Then, I cut to the clear footage of him ignoring the warning signs, climbing the gate, the yelp, the fall, and our calm, polite conversation afterwards. I used my technical writing skills to add simple, factual on-screen text. 1:15 p.m. Formal warning letters sent to HOA. 2:48 p.m. HOA agent ignores posted warnings. 2:49 p.m. Agent illegally enters private, fence property. I uploaded the video to a private server and drafted an email. The email was addressed to the 3 members of the HOA board. The subject line was formal complaint and evidence regarding HOA agent misconduct. The body of the email was professional and to the point. It detailed our long-standing issues with Mr. Abernathy's harassment and trespassing, referencing my previous in-person complaint and the certified letter. It described the events of the afternoon as a culmination of this behavior. And then, the final paragraph. We have taken legally permissible, non-harmful measures to secure our property, as is our right. The attached video documents Mr. Abernathy's latest transgression. We expect the board to take immediate and definitive action to resolve this matter. If we do not receive a satisfactory response within 48 hours, we will be forwarding this evidence to all homeowners in the Harmony Creek community, as well as to local news outlets and our legal counsel. We trust you will handle this with the gravity it deserves. I attached the video link and hit send. The ball was now in their court. They could no longer dismiss us or hide behind procedure. We had presented them with undeniable, embarrassing evidence of their agents' misconduct and their own negligence. They were on the clock. The downfall of a petty tyrant rarely happens in a single dramatic moment. It's often a series of smaller, more humiliating steps. We had just kicked Abernathy down the first step. Now, we were going to let the bureaucracy he loved so much push him the rest of the way down. We knew Brenda and her cronies would be furious, not at Abernathy's actions, but at the fact that we had cornered them so completely. Their power depended on their residents feeling isolated and powerless. We had just shown them, and were prepared to show everyone, that they weren't untouchable. The aftermath of our email was swift and, from our perspective, deeply satisfying. The 48-hour deadline was a calculated move. It gave them enough time to understand the gravity of their situation, but not enough time to formulate a complex, evasive strategy. The panic must have set in almost immediately at HOA headquarters, Brenda's dining room. Less than 24 hours after I hit send, we received a formal email summoning us to an emergency executive session of the HOA board that very evening. The tone was no longer dismissive. It was laced with a panicked urgency. Grandpa and I arrived at the community center to find a very different atmosphere from our last visit. The 3 board members were there, along with a flustered-looking Mr. Abernathy, who refused to look at us. Brenda, the board president, did not look pleased. Her usual air of smug superiority had been replaced by a tense, brittle anger. "Thank you for coming," she began, dispensing with any pleasantries. "We have reviewed your submission. While we do not condone Mr. Abernathy's method of entry, the board is deeply concerned about your installation of an unapproved and dangerous electrified fence." I held up a hand to stop her. "Let's be precise, Brenda," I said calmly. "Firstly, it is not a fence, it is a single gate. Secondly, it is not dangerous. It is a standard, UL-listed agricultural deterrent operating at a safe, low amperage. And thirdly, it is not unapproved because it falls under City Ordinance 74B, which preempts any HOA aesthetic guidelines regarding garden protection. I have the paperwork right here. Again, if you'd like to see it." I placed my folder on the table with a quiet thud. Grandpa chimed in, his voice carrying the weight of decades of engineering expertise. "The system is designed to be startling, not harmful. It's no more dangerous than the static shock you get from a doorknob in the winter. The only way to activate it is to deliberately climb a locked gate while ignoring 3 clearly posted warning signs. Any danger was created entirely by Mr. Abernathy's decision to break the law." Abernathy finally spoke, his voice a pathetic whine. "They targeted me. It was a trap." "We did not target you, Mr. Abernathy," I replied, looking him directly in the eye for the first time. "We secured our property. You targeted yourself. You are the only person who has repeatedly and illegally entered our backyard. The system is an entirely passive deterrent. You had to actively choose to become its victim. The logic was inescapable." Brenda tried a different tack, attempting to reframe it as a community safety issue, but we were ready. We pointed out that the system was only active for 3 hours on weekdays, was on our private property, and was clearly marked. We contrasted this with the liability the HOA was exposing itself to by employing an agent who repeatedly trespassed, creating a pattern of harassment that could lead to a major lawsuit. Brenda saw her power slipping away. Her last-ditch effort was to threaten us with fines for the unapproved signage. I almost laughed. "Go ahead," I said. "Send us the fine. We'll add it to the evidence file for a harassment lawsuit. The video of your agent ignoring those signs to trespass on our property is going to look fantastic in front of a judge. I'm sure they'll agree the signs were the real problem here. Checkmate." They had nothing left. The argument was over. Brenda looked at Abernathy with pure venom. He was no longer a loyal soldier. He was a liability who had publicly embarrassed her and threatened the board's authority. "Mr. Abernathy," she said, her voice dripping with ice, "please wait outside." After he shuffled out of the room, the board's tone changed completely. It was all about damage control. They offered to rescind all of our previous violations. They promised to formally censure Abernathy and strip him of his patrol duties. They asked, almost pleaded, for us to take down the video and consider the matter resolved internally. We agreed, but with conditions. First, we wanted a formal, written apology from the board, acknowledging their agents' misconduct and their failure to act on our initial complaint. Second, we wanted a written guarantee that no HOA representative would ever enter our fenced property again without 24 hours written notice and our explicit consent. Third, Abernathy was to be permanently removed from any position of authority within the HOA. And fourth, they would amend the official patrol guidelines to explicitly forbid trespassing. They reluctantly agreed to all terms. The next day, we received the apology letter. That afternoon, a notice went out to the entire community announcing that Mr. Abernathy was retiring from his volunteer patrol duties for personal reasons. His reign was over. His power, built on a foundation of petty rules and intimidation, had been short-circuited by a simple, elegant application of logic, law, and a little bit of 12-volt electricity. The system we had built was about more than just a gate. It was about restoring balance. We had used the rules, the real rules, the ones that exist beyond the HOA's flimsy covenants, to dismantle the authority of a man who thought he was above them all.